Hey everybody, it's Tim K from Tim K Fishing and Outdoors coming at you from the shop today. Rigging up a bunch of rods, getting ready to head out next weekend, do a little fishing. But I thought I would take a minute and talk to you about one of my favorite techniques, and that's skipping a jig. Whether it's under a dock, a lay down branch, between those pontoons on that pontoon boat, I thought I'd take a minute and talk to you about my setup, kind of how I practice, and some tips and tricks. So first off, my setup. Let's talk about the rod selection. Pretty critical. So when you think about jigs, a lot of people think about 7-11, 7-6, 8 foot. Those are punching sticks. They're not skipping rods. A skipping rod is going to be short in length. A good skipping rod will be heavy action, fast tip. So I use the KastKing Royal Select. They make a 7-foot rod, heavy action, fast tip. I think it's a fantastic skipping rod. So you want to keep it short. Short rod gives you better accuracy, better control over that jig, and helps you, believe it or not, manage the spool better if you have good connection between you and that jig at the end of your rod. So keep it short. An example, Brian Thrift, probably one of the best jig skippers on tour today. His skipping rod is 6'10". Andy Montgomery uses a 7'1". Two guys that I kind of look up to in terms of skipping. So keep it short. Reel. So you want kind of a fast reel. So anything between 7-1, and this is actually the KastKing Speed Demon 8-6-1 speed reel. You don't want to get into those 10-1s. It's too fast. And the reason is because if you got a fast reel, you'll lose a lot of torque when you hook a fish and you're trying to pull it away from that dock. So you want to use one that's in that 7 to 8.5 range. You want it kind of fast because you got to pick line up pretty quick. So I use the KastKing Speed Demon 8-6-1. I find it gives me enough torque to get that fish away from that dock, and it's fast enough to pick up line when I need to. Reel setup is pretty critical. So the cool thing about this Speed Demon is that it has a magnetic brake system. And you'll see on mine, I have my magnetic brakes set on 9, the highest setting. And what that allows the reel to do is help manage backlash for me, because backlash is going to happen. So I have mine set on 9, which is the highest setting for the magnetic brakes. However, the spool tension knob I have set very loose. So my spool, my jig is coming off that spool pretty quickly. So I keep my spool tension knob set pretty loose, but my magnetic brakes are set at the highest setting. Line. So I use braided line. I like braided line because it's durable, it hooks good, and you can control a fish better with it. However, braided line is known for backlashing and becoming very difficult to get untangled when you do backlash. However, I found that this KastKing Mega 8 in 50-pound test works fantastic for skipping, and when you do backlash, because you will, it's easy to pick out. Even Cliff Crochet, who is like a big stick flipping fool, he recommends, this is kind of where I got the tip from, if you use that bigger braid, it's easier to pick out and get out of backlashes than a smaller braid. So 50-pound Mega 8 KastKing braided line. If you're not a fan of braided line, that's fine, I get it. One thing I would recommend if you're starting out, you'll hear a lot of the pros, the Andy Montgomerys, Brian Thrift, all talking about fluorocarbon, 20-pound fluorocarbon. But, you know, for the average person like you and I, 20-pound fluorocarbon skipping is difficult to manage because we just don't do it enough. Those guys are doing it every day of their life, and they can manage it. However, one tip I picked up from Andy Montgomery, when he started skipping, he would practice with 20-pound monofilament. And monofilament probably gives you the best spool control or line control on the spool than any out there. It has very low memory, it doesn't backlash that much, and when it does, it's easy to get out. However, what I would recommend, and I've used this, KastKing has this fluorocoat. This is a copolymer with a fluorocarbon coating over the top. It gives you, again, excellent line control on the spool, but when you do backlash, it's easier to control, easier to get untangled than, let's say, a pure fluorocarbon. So those are my two line selections. Mega 850 and Fluorocoat 15 to 20. 17, 20, right in that range is pretty good. So those are my two lines. So short rod, 7 foot, heavy action, fast tip, reel. You want it to be somewhat fast, 7 to 8. This is an 8.6, as I said. And then of course your line, 50-pound braid is what I use, or the copolymer. So technique, the technique for skipping. Let's see if I can show you this. The skipping technique is a roll cast. You want to have good connection between you and that jig on the end, and you want to get the feel for where that jig is on the cast. So let me step back. I'm going to try and show you this a couple times here. So my setup, when I go to cast, generally my jig is going to be about 3-4 inches down from the tip of the rod. I find that gives me a good feel for where that jig is when I'm making that roll cast. If it's too far down, you kind of lose feel for where that jig is. You lose control of it. It's all kind of all over the place. But I do it 3-4 inches down. It gives me good control and good feel for where that jig is on the roll cast. So my roll cast, my setup is kind of like this. And you'll notice at the end of the cast, after I make that roll, I kind of lift the tip up at the end. And what that does is that helps position that jig correctly to skip under that dock. So generally you make your roll and you kind of lift up at the end. And what I'm looking for when I'm practicing, and the reason why I use the chartreuse skirt, now I don't flip with a chartreuse skirt. However, I want to see what that jig is doing as it's going across the floor. Is it bouncing or is it sliding? If it's bouncing, I know that it's going to bounce on the water as well, and it's not going to perform right. If it's just sliding across the floor, that's what I'm looking for. And that chartreuse skirt just helps me visualize what that jig is doing as I make that roll cast and as it slides across the floor. So that's kind of my setup. Kind of my deal, man. I am a big jig skipper. Even for co-anglers, I would strongly suggest you learn how to skip a jig, because I've had co-anglers in my boat where I'm going around a dock and I'm hitting the outside pylons and they're skipping under, catching fish that I missed. So that's when I decided, honestly, that I got to figure out how to skip a jig. I got my butt kicked by a co-angler in the back of my boat, skipping a jig behind me because I couldn't do it. So I would encourage you, learn how to skip a jig. Technique that a lot of guys don't know how to do. So encourage you to do it. So again, keep the rod short, 7 foot or shorter, reel somewhat fast, 7 to this 8.6. And I'll tell you, this 8.6 KastKing, fantastic skipping rod. I mean, I love the external brakes, great spool speed, it's light, manageable. Check it out. 7 foot Royal Select from KastKing, 8.6 Speed Demon, 50-pound Mega Braid, and you'll be a skipping wonder person. So, hey, anything else? Reach out to me in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And we'll talk to you soon. Good luck fishing this year. Talk at you. See you. Bye.